Chapter 14. The Anti-Semite.
The bestial transformation occurred when Allah turned Jews into apes.
Let's move more deeply into the second year of the Islamic era to see how Muhammad perpetrated his fraud.
Tabari. Allah changed the Muslim Qiblah from Jerusalem to the Kaaba in the second year of residence in Medina. The people used to pray toward Jerusalem. He used to raise his head to see what he would be commanded. This was abrogated in favor of the Kaaba,
the true source of his inspiration. When the Prophet arrived in Yathrib, he demeaned the Kaaba, as this conversation with his real new wife suggests.
Bukhari. The apostle said to Aisha, "Don't you see that your folk did not build the Kaaba on the foundations built by Abraham?" I said, "O apostle, why don't we rebuild it on them?" He said, "But for the fact your folk have recently given up infidelity." Umar agreed. Aisha must have heard this from Allah's apostle, for he never touched the two corners facing Al-Hijr, because the house had not been built on the right foundations.
Confession is good for the soul. But this disdain could not last. Jerusalem was claimed by the God of the Jews, and was in their land. For Muhammad to be important, for him to succeed in his quest, he needed something close at hand. Perhaps the Kaaba could be buffed up a bit, legitimized by a little plagiarized and situational scripture.
Bukhari. While some people were offering prayer, a man came and said, "Koranic literature has been revealed to Allah's apostle tonight. He is ordered to face the Kaaba at Mecca, so you should turn your faces toward it." At that moment they were facing Jerusalem, so they turned toward the Kaaba.
Allah was always so accommodating.
Bukhari. The Prophet prayed facing Jerusalem, but he wished that his Qibla would be facing the Kaaba at Mecca, so Allah revealed the Quran. A man who had prayed with him went out and said, "I swear I have prayed with the Prophet facing Mecca." Hearing that, they turned their faces to the Kaaba while they were still bowing. Some men had died before the Qibla was changed, and we did not know what to say about them, whether their prayers toward Jerusalem were accepted or not.
If the Islamic God were everywhere, all-powerful, ever-listening, always watchful, why would he care which direction a devotee turned in prayer? Why all the fuss? To quote a Meccan, there must be some motive behind this. Personally, I think it was to dump on the Jews.
Bukhari. People say, whenever you sit for answering the call of nature, you should not face the Qibla of Jerusalem. I told them, once I went up to the roof of our house, and I saw Allah's apostle answering the call of nature while sitting on two bricks facing Jerusalem.
Since this is supposed to be a religion, let's review the first surah revealed in Medina to find a more inspired reason. The second surah, the Quran's longest, is really its first surah, as the first is
the prologue,
a 60-word invocation. Its speaker isn't Allah. The second surah, which was the 90th received, is called
The Cow,
in reference to the golden calf cast by the Israelites during their exodus nearly 2,000 years before Islam was invented. Muslim scholars acknowledge that the surah was handed down in pieces over the course of a decade. Madudi, our Koranic scholar, says,
The Cow has been so named from the story of the golden calf associated with Moses. It has not, however, been used as a title to indicate the subject of the surah. It will, therefore, be as wrong to translate the name Al-Baqarah into the cow as to translate any English name, say baker, rice, or wolf, into their equivalents in other languages, or vice versa, because this would imply that the surah dealt with the subject of the cow.
This argument is as irrational as it is telling. It goes to the very heart of Muhammad's deception. Names and words are different things. We can and should translate the word for the profession of baker, but never the name of a person named Baker. Baqarah is the Arabic word for cow. It is not the name of a cow. Similarly, Il and Ilah are Arabic words for God, not the names of gods. Words for things must always be translated, while the personal names of deities and people should never be. Ar-Rahman, Allah, and Yahweh are the personal names of very different gods. Anyone who replaces the name Allah with the word God is guilty of deceiving their audience and of contradicting the Quran. Madudi goes on to explain.
The greater part of Al-Baqarah was revealed during the first 2 years of the Prophet's life at Medina. Some of it was revealed at a later period and has been included in this surah because its contents are closely related to those dealt with in this surah. For instance, the verses prohibiting interest were revealed during the last period of the Prophet's life. For the same reason, the last verses of this surah were revealed in Mecca before the migration of the Prophet.
This argument is inconsistent with the Quran as a whole. If it were God's plan to have like subjects grouped together, the never-ending argument and related depictions of hellish torments wouldn't be randomly strewn throughout the book. All things related to Moses would be brought together, not disseminated in 24 surahs. Further, the last verses are unrelated to the business discussion preceding them. They are therefore out of context and chronology. A perfect book cannot by definition be disordered. Yet there is a larger problem. The surah contains the verse on abrogation, which says,
"Whenever we cancel a message or throw it into oblivion, we replace it with a better one."
Without dismembering the entire Quran so that every line follows the revelation which immediately preceded it, the cancel and replace concept is futile. How is anyone to know which verses Allah threw into oblivion? Without context and chronology, the cancel and replace verse renders the entire Quran irrelevant. If one line discourages slavery and another condones it, which is to be believed? If one verse says that infidels are to be taxed to death, and others order them put to death, what are Muslims to do? The answer is obvious, but apparently not to Muslims, or to those in our state houses, media, and pulpits, who coddle Islam. A God who changes his mind repeatedly over a score of years, and needs a verse to deal with his contradictions, cannot be God. A religion devoted to a false spirit isn't worth protecting, especially when it motivates men to murder. Madudi wasn't finished incriminating his religion.
At Mecca, the Quran generally addressed the Quraysh who were ignorant of Islam. At Medina, it was concerned with the Jews who were acquainted with the unity of Allah, prophethood, revelation, the hereafter, and angels. They also professed to believe in the law which was revealed by Allah to their prophet Moses. And in principle, their way was the same Islam that was being taught by the prophet Muhammad.
Like all things Islam, the truth has been inverted. The reason both Jews and Muslims believed in prophets, revelation, and angels was because Mohammed stole these concepts, words, and names from them. Further, Jews believed in the oneness of Yahweh, not in some pathetic rock idol named Allah. They knew that the dark spirit of the Quran was Satan. It's obvious to anyone familiar with the Bible. Yahweh used his name 7,000 times in his scriptures. Allah's name was never mentioned. The closest Hebrew word means oak tree. The Jews had a word for God, too. It was El, and they used it when describing pagan idols, like the Islamic deity. As for
the Jewish way,
being
the same Islam,
that's Meshuggah. Jewish prophets predicted the future and condemned immoral behavior. The Islamic prophet authorized immoral behavior and condemned the future. They are opposites. Torah means instructions and prescriptions, not laws, but either way, those guidelines were summarized in the 10 Commandments. Mohammed declared war on all of them, as did his God. They could not have been chiseled in stone by the rock idol who established a false doctrine, promoting theft and murder.